Hello and welcome to Rewind Reviews, the podcast where we talk about mostly family movies from our childhood, but occasionally we step into movies that very much don't fit that mold. I saw a comment on one of our videos recently that was like, Rewind Reviews, family movies, plus RoboCop. And I was like, yep, that's about right.
Oh, we've gotten way worse. That's not even the worst example.
No, Battle Royale was probably the worst, let's be honest.
Yeah, I was going to say, Battle Royale, without a doubt.
But we take a look back at movies that we enjoyed when we were younger, see if they still hold up, or if they don't. At some point, I keep threatening this, and I'm at some point I will do it, pull the trigger on doing a movie that neither of us have seen, but is like, famously beloved that just for whatever reason neither of us came across, or never really bothered checking out.
I nearly did that because Jess suggested The Breakfast Club, but which I know I haven't seen, but I didn't know if you had seen it.
Yeah, I saw it when I was young once, but I barely remember it. I remember the key plot and the ending, but I don't really remember any of the scenes. And I know that these days it's got a bit of a reputation for not actually holding up at all in terms of it's apparently a bit problematic. But
not as much, I don't think, as
Fast Times.
No, 16 Candles.
Oh, 16 Candles is another one. Yeah, so there's a few like that I'm aware of, but yeah, there's a few like the Goonies. I don't think I ever saw all of the Goonies. I think I saw scenes from the Goonies. I don't think I ever saw all of the Goonies.
No, I've never seen the Goonies either.
So
anyway, Sixth Sense.
Sixth Sense is what we're watching today, which is a movie from sort of my past. I gave too much information about this last week, but I'll very quickly recap it now for anyone who's jumping on board. The reason this movie is meaning for me is last week we were talking about, as we discussed, God, what film did we watch last week? That's bad. Memento. Memento, that idea of going from watching your sort of blockbuster, big release family films, kids films, and occasionally, like a big action movie or whatever, to like shifting into like, oh, actually, films can be more impactful than that. They can have more heart, or they can be cleverer than that, and like that trend into pretension that a lot of teenage film fans follow through. And teenagers of Chris and I's generation had a very similar pattern in terms of which films that was, and I was talking about Fight Club being a gateway film to that for a lot of us. And then I said, but if you can actually trace it back further, for me personally, the minute I realized films could be a little bit more than just like frivolous entertainment, I was like actually blown away by a film. I distinctly remember being 11 or 12 and getting, I think initially a VHS copy, a preview copy, because my nan worked in a video store and they'd send a preview copy shortly after it was in the cinema, but 6 months ahead of its release sometimes, of an upcoming, to try and coax them into ordering lots of copies for the video store. And she had a preview copy with a watermark on it of The Sixth Sense. I remember, I think it was my family were watching something. My mum and her and my granddad were watching something in the living room, and they had a small combi VCR TV in the kitchen, but no seat to sit in front of it. So I was just on my knees in front of this tiny TV. Watching The Sixth Sense, my mum occasionally coming through to make a cup of tea during like the adverts for Coronation Street. But it's that does paint quite a vivid picture, doesn't it? That's how I watched the movie, and I just remember, because I was only, I would have been 11, 12. I've not done the exact math, but in that age range, I just remember being like blown away because at that point in my life, with a few exceptions, I was mostly watching like either kids films or like I watched a lot of like I did sneak a lot of horror films away from my parents, but even those were all big genre films. They weren't cinematic in that sense. They weren't thoughtful character anythings. It was Gremlins isn't exactly a strong character piece, right? Do you know what I mean? I was probably too young to watch Gremlins when I watched Gremlins, or RoboCop, for example. But they weren't exactly like, they were heavy genre films with a real stylized approach. And this was like the first time I was like, oh, you can like, they can do some really clever things with this storytelling, and like these characters are so. Like, I wouldn't have said these characters are so rich, but like I definitely think I connected to the emotion of this story, and understood that the film got me there, even if I didn't understand how. and finding that
makes
quite
sense.
profound. And then the twist, which is obviously amazing, which my nan had casually mentioned in front of me when telling my mum what it was I was about to be watching. And ruining it for me, and then I basically forgot as I was watching it, and then and then later on being like blown away by an ending I already knew, and then feeling stupid because I then remembered hearing it. So yeah, a big part of my childhood, and definitely I remember when the DVD came out, seeking it out for one of the first times I remember seeking out content to learn about how the film was made and the man who made it and what that meant. He was the first director I would call, other than like Spielberg, he's the first director I would have called myself a fan of.
Yeah, and this film like made him a real like celebrity director, didn't it? Like,
yeah.
I really remember everyone knowing his name,
Right.
like, and style, and talking about him like he was going to be the next,
That-
Tarantino or whatever, which obviously didn't particularly pan out. But
Well,
yeah.
the Newsweek, literally, you can Google it, around the time of Sign's release, had a cover story, picture of M. Night, and the headline reads, "The Next Spielberg." From Sixth Sense to Signs, M. Night Shyamalan is Hollywood's hottest new storyteller.
Yep.
We've
reviewed an M. Night film on it before.
Yeah, but I was very cognizant of that it was made by a person, and if you look at my history, getting into like film and storytelling and wanting to study writing, and even this podcast, you can trace a lot of it back to some of those early moments, and I think The Sixth Sense is a really pivotal one for me. Even though M. Night has gone on to make some much less quality films, I still think this one's an amazing film, almost a masterpiece. The way it blends its genre elements with genuine heart and character story, for me, is a real lesson in how to do that, even though he seems to have forgotten how to do that in the subsequent years, After Earth being one of the better examples of how not to do what this movie succeeds at doing. It's like he's learning how to make films in reverse. Like, he was right up top, he mastered it, and then he sort of somehow forgot the lessons he'd already learned. But anyway, that's my sort of history with it. I know that this is the first time you've seen it, so I'm very curious. No?
Huh?
It's the first time you saw it, right? Was this viewing?
Yeah. No, yeah.
So,
which makes it difficult in some regards.
I'm curious what your understanding of the film was before you sat down to watch it, or what relationship you had to it at all prior to that, other than presumably knowing the twist through cultural osmosis, and then like what your experience of watching it was. Because I've also talked way too much at this point.
I knew the twist through Cosmo, culture, cosmosis, or whatever the phrase you just used was.
Cultural osmosis.
Cultural
good
osmosis. So I knew the twist. I knew it was very renowned. I knew it was up for loads of awards. I knew Bruce Willis cared in it. And I knew, and you can,
I love that that's the scale. Is it one of the ones where Bruce Willis gave a shit, or is it one of the ones Bruce Willis phoned
basically in? And I knew, so that's kind of it. That's kind of what I knew. I knew the plot. I knew the twist. I knew the, I see dead people line. Although I thought that was in a car, and it wasn't. So I was he's going to say the line. This is not when I was expecting him to say the line. Cool. And I think that I recommend it because my thoughts are very kind of immediately taking us into analysing it, and I think it's interesting because we'll get to that. I would absolutely recommend watching it. I don't think it's a perfect film for reasons I'm about to go into, but if we're doing recommendations, especially Jesus, if you somehow manage to not know the twist, Christ, stop this now and watch it. If you know the twist and haven't seen it, I'd still recommend watching it, but you're going to have a different experience to the one Dan described. And I would absolutely recommend it. I think the music is beautiful. I think it's a very auteur film. I think all the performances are brilliant. There's a lot to love, which we'll talk about more, but it's hard to talk about this film without kind of spoilers. So definitely recommend it. And I assume you do too, Dan.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm amazed at how much this film still holds up. Like, there's like I'll be very interested to hear what your issues with it were, because like I rewatching it, I was expecting to find all sorts of stuff that didn't track or didn't work backwards, but I was very pleasantly surprised to discover that it still completely functions, and I did expect a certain amount of inconsistencies or issues, but it all kind of worked for me, and so I'm very interested to hear what your issues were. But yeah, a definite recommend from me. If you've gone this long without knowing the twist, without question, you should see this. But if you know the twist, I would still say it's worth checking out, because I still think it's a really masterfully told story, and the mother-son relationship that's at the heart of this film is absolutely beautiful. And I would say as well, the way the plots intertwine is kind of genius on many ways. In many ways, there's a few different things all happening at once, but they're all focused around this one element, and like the ability to wrap up a narrative the way this movie wraps up its narrative is so neat, and it feels very, very thought out and very deliberate and quite artfully done. So just from a script writing perspective, this film is extremely, extremely tight, which is, again, sadly no longer the norm for an M. Night movie. But a big recommend for sure. So yeah, I'm curious, Chris. Yep. What's the... Go on.
This is going to be so weird and interesting, and like I think like maybe I'm alone in what I'm going to say, because some of that I don't agree with. But we'll talk about why in a minute. The twist of it all, it's I can't judge the twist, and my opinion on the twist should not be valid. Because I'm sitting there watching it, going, God, this feels really obvious. Of course it is. I fucking know the twist, so I can't. Judge the twist,
and truly they committed to it, so it works when you watch it back. So
it's so from that sense, it's so effective. Because I imagine, and let me be, I will be one. I've already admitted my opinion on the twist isn't really relevant, because I don't think anyone that knows the twist should give an opinion on it. I will also admit, I don't think I'd have realised watching it. I don't.
No.
But when like you say, there's a lot of fun in repeat viewing, because I imagine you've watched it since going, how the fuck did I not see this?
Right, yeah. Well, I mean, M. Night and the producers actually had a big debate about the editing choices in the I See Dead People scene, because the camera's pushing in on Bruce as he's saying these things. They don't know they're dead. It's literally hanging on Bruce, and he's looking all pensive. And I'm like, geez, that's pretty telegraphed. Which tells me
how it's really it's the lines as well. I see people that don't know they're dead all the time. Like, I mean, and obviously we never go back to the shooting and what happened. And obviously, when you watch it back, we know why we never go back to the shooting, because we know what happened. He died.
But I think the genius choice, though, from a script writing perspective, the reason they get away with it, for me, I think, is the genius choice of having the making the reason they're not talking be these marital troubles. Because that's so simple, but so smart, because it fits the character, an obsession with righting a wrong after being shot by the other kid, but it also fits the ghost narrative of a character that has unfinished business on this earth, and by helping Cole, that's his unfinished business, so to speak. They never phrase it that way, but that is kind of essentially what they're getting at, and that allows him to sort of move on. But because they give it this marital issue thing, which also perfectly fits with the information the scenes we're seeing, like the scene where he goes into the restaurant and he sits down and he's talking and he's like, I'm sorry I'm late, and this kid, I think I can just help, and he's like gets lost in his work and he has this big old speech, and then she's just like, happy anniversary, and gets up and leaves. That makes perfect sense if he's not a ghost.
Yeah, completely. Yeah,
right.
Yeah.
So it's kind of amazing. Like, I know exactly how that twist functions, but and why it should feel obvious, but also why it is it's one of the exact reasons it isn't at all obvious somehow.
Yeah, and the fact that it works on everyone, and like I say, that's why I'm saying, because I reckon there are people that watch this knowing that would go, oh, it's really obvious, isn't it? And it's like, it's only obvious because I don't think anyone that knows can judge the effectiveness of that.
Correct.
Because that's what's so wonderful about it. So I think the twist is executed perfectly. In general, the thing I don't agree with is I don't think the script is that tight, or at least I have problems with the script. In general, like the twist, this film is full of a number of incredible ideas. But I think my challenges with the script is it felt in places like we're dealing with this amazing idea, now we're going to deal with this amazing idea. And it's this collection of amazing scenes, but I personally, if I'm looking at it from a critical eye, would have wanted more interweaving and linking between the two. So, for example, the scene where the scene where he talks to his mum about what he sees, and he talks about his nan, and sort of says, she's proud of you every day, or the answer is every day, and she watched you dance, and all of that sort of stuff. Phenomenal scene, great idea.
One of the best scenes in the movie, I think.
Yeah, and I genuinely a fantastic scene. Again, I'm being a little picky here. I'm being quite critical, and potentially because I know his reputation, so I'm in the back of my head subconsciously looking out for script stuff. But that scene isn't embedded in the rest of the movie. We see him see other ghosts. What if one of them was his grandma? What if one of them was an old lady and we don't know the context of it yet? Or at some point he sees an old lady? Because there's a fair chunk of the film where we know what's happening before that scene. We could have had an old lady. Maybe we have some indication that she's got unresolved business with her mum. She mentions her mum. It's a brilliant scene, but I think it's even more beautiful if it's embedded throughout the movie. And for me...
Go on.
Yeah, go on. No, you go.
I disagree with that statement. I'll tell you what, it's embedded into the movie because it's not about the gran. It's about the relationship between him and the mother. And the scene early in the movie where they talk about the pendant being moved, it's about him opening up to her. That's what's beautiful about that scene. The nan stuff is just so she is not just an emotional impact for her, but also her relationship with her own son. So the nan isn't actually what it's about in that moment. It's about the curtain being dropped between the two of them, this veil that's separated them because he's not felt comfortable to tell the truth because he's been scared she won't believe him. I mean, the scene, it's paying off the scene earlier in the movie about the pendant. So there's a bumblebee pendant that used to belong to her mother, already set up in the movie, in there, and then it keeps being moved and she keeps finding it in his drawer. And she obviously doesn't believe that it's not being him. She's like, "Did you move my pendant?" He's like, "No," because he didn't. And it's this heartbreaking scene at the dinner table where she's like, "All you have to do is just admit you did it." No one walked into this house and moved the pendant, which from her perspective is 100% accurate. From her perspective, obviously the child moved the pendant. But his not admitting it is again, it's this barrier between them. And then through Bruce Willis's character, Malcolm, his interactions with Cole finally feels comfortable enough to pull down the veil, be honest with his mother. But it's also echoing a lack of honesty between her and her mother. So it's like catharsis for her, because not only is her mother revealing a thing that she didn't, there was a secret between them, there was a thing that she never got to tell her before she passed. Cole's telling her his secret before that moment. So it all culminates in this insane way where all of these disparate plots just suddenly hit us with this incredibly emotional thing. I didn't need to see the grandmother 2 scenes before. That wouldn't have changed any of that at all. And in fact, if anything, I think it would have done the opposite, because I think having heard that story previously would have maybe made the impact of it in the moment when he tells her and her reaction feel a little bit weaker. Because we'd already know that story.
Yeah, I'm not talking about the story being played differently. I mean, I wouldn't have mind seeing an old lady personally, or maybe she makes some reference. I accept the pendant argument, and actually, I think you raise a good point in an argument, and it's very typical of us. Of it works for you because at its heart is a character thing. Whereas I'm often very much about story beats, and for me, weaving it in a little bit. It's not just my only example of that, though, in terms of the script and stuff. Another one for me is the girl that basically appears and then he realizes she's been murdered. So one, I think if that girl is embedded throughout earlier in the movie, and so because that very much is he sees the girl, they have the chat, and then he's on the bus. In fact, I don't even think they have the chat. He sees the girl, then they're on the bus.
Yeah,
So he sees the girl. Then they're on the bus, then they go to the funeral. It all happens at once.
I've
got more thoughts on
story
that.
response to that example, though. And again, this might be an effect of knowing where it's going, unfortunately, because it's a mystery what's going on with that kid for the first 50 minutes of the movie. You can't show the girl prior to that scene. She's one of the first ones we outright see, because the whole point of the movie, from the perspective of, if you were coming into it like at cold, which is obviously how you would have done heading into a cinema in '99, for a lot of the movie, you're going, what's with this kid? Is he insane? Is it ghosts? You wouldn't even think, is it ghosts? He just knows things, and doors open around him, and so the first hour of the movie plays really differently without that information. It's only the turning point in the bed when he admits the ghost thing, when you go back, oh, is that why he knew about the teacher's stutter? Is that how he knew about? He's not psychic or anything. He's literally talking to ghosts. So you can't embed the girl any earlier than that.
You can embed. Well, he says that he sees dead people at 50 minutes, and the girl appears at 1 hour 17. So there is half an hour.
But also we've also got to keep in mind that during that time we want to establish that he's seeing tons of different ghosts all of the time. So the only other ghosts we see between that moment and the sequence with the girl, they have to be different, surely, because it can't just be, because otherwise it's just being haunted by one person. But with all this information he's gotten, and speaking in Latin and stuttering Stanley and all the people being hanged in the school, the whole implication is that it's tons and tons of different ghosts. If we only ever as an audience then see one, where are all these Spanish conquistadors or all these crazy people that he's clearly coming across? It's you have a problem with it there, I think, as well. And also
and I think again that's a knowing where it's going thing, because obviously to me I knew how he had that information about the teacher, etc. Again, another good defense. Not the same issue, but another issue with that, and if you've got a defense for this, all power to you. You love the movie, but fuck me, is it clunky that she happened to have been videotaping herself?
Yeah,
moves the thing. The videotape keeps running. That's already clunky enough without I'm sorry, but she comes in, puts the food down, leaves the fucking room the camera,
when she could have done it in the kitchen. Yeah,
leaves the room to get the poison, comes back, administers the poison, and then walks away. And I'm just surely he could, for me, that would have been so much better if he'd have found something that puts it in the guy's mind, and then how powerful was that to see this guy's love for his child is so big that he'd trust this child over his wife because he also just knows it to be true. That didn't need to be, the fucking videotape was still running, did it?
No.
And the bit where she walks away and mixes the poison in front of her was just fucking, I was like, okay, movie, I'm having a difficult time with this.
No, that sequence definitely, it's one of those things where it's I get why it ended up clunky, because it's you want to get to the point quickly, because it's not really with the car thing, with the sequence in the car, it's not really about the grandmother, it's about that relationship, and this is about Cole finding his peace with his new role in life, which is helping these people. So the story of the people he's helping,
which I get,
has to be dramatic and interesting, but it also has to be solved quickly. And he's kind of shot himself in the foot there, because the quick solution to that is Cole finds a tape, and on the tape is the proof. Because obviously, otherwise, you've got tons of questions of how quickly did he? Because if they'd done it another way, if Cole had found an empty bottle of some sort of thing in the kitchen or whatever and handed it to him and said, she wants you to see this, then you're going, how has the dad jumped to the conclusion that it's Munchausen's by proxy? That makes no sense. So you're damned if you do, damned if you don't. I 100% agree. It's super clunky, and I definitely chuckled when I'm willing to go with the camera is set up because she's filming her puppet show, but I'm not going to go with the mother shiftily looks around then pulls out whatever she was making
And then
pouring it in,
and then
in front of the
presumably
camera,
it was-
like perfectly positioned.
And then presumably it was the mother that, if the girl then died right away, what? It's the mother that then takes the tape out and puts it in a fucking box under the bed? Like, yeah, I just... And
I assumed the girl had died many moons later, but like she'd or many moons, like a period of time later, and that the girl had seen the tape, realized what it was, but wasn't sure her dad would believe her maybe, and had hidden it. That's how I kind of read that. But again, that's a bit fansplaining. I'm just sort of like making that make sense. But yeah, for me that would be... If I agree with that concern, but if that concern was in my notes, which it isn't, but if it was, it would be under nitpick corner, because it's
but this is my thing. I think for me, it felt like he needed a script editor. I feel like a script editor, and who am I to judge? I fucking know that, like, obviously, but I feel like it's the kind of thing maybe that he needed. It felt like no one was in the room going, maybe there's a way of making that less clunky. And even some of the dialogue, like, even at the end, when, like, we know that he's realised he needed to help Cole because he didn't help the other guy. Like, we've picked that up. Like, I don't have the dialogue in front of me because I can't get subtitles on this version. But, like, It just felt like some of the dialogue as well was on the nose, and it's annoying because I don't have a specific example of that. But like, it felt like the script in general just needed a bit of polishing. Is my big sort of nitpick with it.
Yeah, and why I don't think it's I think it's such a tight script. I think I'll give you the whole mother thing, but the rest of it, the dialogue thing, I will say, I think I see how they got there. I think I think that's just a, will the audience get this studio thing? I don't think he chose to make that dialogue obvious. My feeling on that, and this is just a feeling, the same way that your feeling is that it, was a bit clunky and needed an editor. I feel that it was probably less overt, and the studio went, will they get that? Make it clearer. We're revealing he's a ghost. You just need to say it, like, edit in, because notice a lot of it's in editing as well. They put like a lot of old clips back in to really like lay it out for you. Like, they have Cole repeating his "I see dead people. They don't know they're dead." They really hammer it home in that last scene, and I think that smacks of studio going, will they get it? That smacks of a test screening audience where one guy said, I didn't understand, and they went, okay, and I edited a bunch of shit in to make it go. So I definitely, I don't think you're wrong to have observed that. I think we have different perspectives on why that's there and whether that's acceptable.
Yeah, and I started this whole critique with, I have a completely different viewing experience of this film, knowing where it goes. And I think at the heart of a lot of my complaints and feelings, even about the script, is that I think the key thing I would take away is not even that, I'm definitely right about any of this, even though I feel it. The key thing I would take away is, if you know where this film is going, it's a completely different experience watching it.
Right.
And not if you know because you've watched it before. Because your rewatch is not necessarily saying you, but I mean in that scenario, the rewatch is, oh fuck yeah, I didn't pick up on that. Oh man, how could I not have seen that? Oh yeah, there's that. Whereas I'm going, oh, but that's that, and that's that. But don't have the joy of how great was it that this was hidden from me, because it's not hidden from me.
The other factor in a sort of rewatch versus first watch, when you know where it's going, is it's a mystery movie to start with.
Yeah,
like the dramatic conceit of the entire first 50 minutes of the movie
is what's going on with this kid.
Right. And it's not about ghosts at that point. And that's, I think, another way the twist works, by the way, I think, is that they put such a gap between the shooting and any actual supernatural occurrences that, like, by the time you get to that, you've well forgotten that he got shot at the opening of the movie by Mark Wahlberg's brother, of all people, but that's a different issue.
Sorry, say that again.
By Mark Wahlberg's brother, of all people. That's Donnie Wahlberg having lost like 50 pounds of weight. It's a great performance.
I think that's the thing about like I say, I had that caveat at the beginning, and I will make the caveat again. I'm very much talking about my experience watching it, because that's the thing. You're right. It's not a ghost movie until that point. But in my head, watching it, the whole thing's a ghost movie.
Yeah, it's a ghost movie from minute one.
I'm going, is it not possible that Cole's going to see the dude that shot him as well? But that's completely irrelevant, and you wouldn't want to put that in because it gives away the mystery. So it's more than any other film, and I suppose we've not, there's not that many films that you'd watch in this context. But I think
how many films could you absorb the entire premise of just through cultural osmosis? That's crazy.
Yeah, exactly.
This movie is a victim of its own success, right? Because this movie was an absolute massive runaway hit, like well outside of anyone's expectations, both in the cinema and on DVD. We'll get to the figures later, but it was such a cultural phenomenon in the year it came out. And by the way, the year it came out was the same year as The Matrix and Toy Story 2, and the only thing that beat it at the box office was Phantom Menace.
Because
this was number
people
2.
Must have been, and because people were going, you got to watch this movie, and probably at that point not giving it away, because it's like, even like you say, I suppose it's probably like the biggest mystery film in a way, because like obviously fucking Titanic, the boat sinks, but the movie's not actually about the boat sinking. No. This movie is about the twist and the premise, because it's so embedded in the characters
and the mystery of what's going on with this kid, and then the relationship with the mother.
Yeah, because again, I'm sat there going, it would have been nice to see, once Bruce realised, it would have been nice to see a scene with Cole, but Bruce. Sorry, but what's Bruce Willis's character's name? Malcolm. But Malcolm doesn't need that scene because he's realised what Cole was doing, and Cole doesn't need that scene because he'll just go, oh well, maybe I helped him. Right. I think it'd be a little bit like, where the fuck's that dude gone? But like, yeah, there's all these things. It's just so fascinating because it's. I would still recommend it because, and obviously, we'll get to. We've just started here, but the fucking music, the performances, all of that stuff I named early on, like, is brilliant. And I struggled to have too much to say other than it's brilliant. But it is a completely different, it's a fascinating experience watching a film where the plot, where it goes, why, just because of what that film is. And I think I would still recommend it because the good outweighs all of that. It's just we've not talked about the good yet. But I wouldn't. It's if it gets 6 points to recommend someone watching something, if someone says to me, I know exactly what happens and I know the twist, should I watch it? I'm giving 6 points. Do you know what I mean? I'm not giving 10 points. I think it's a completely different experience when you haven't seen it and you know what it's about, which is fascinating. But of course it is. There's not really another film in this position. Right.
Yeah, and I think you've kind of accidentally hit on like something I loved about the movie that I didn't know I loved about the movie. Because you talked a lot about things that it doesn't have, like, I might have liked a scene with the grandmother, I thought about the possibility of a scene where we get, after he realizes, Cole and Malcolm conversing, or something later in the movie where we bring back the first kid as a ghost now, like what was, Donnie Wahlberg, is he around? Like you've talked about a lot of like what's not there, and actually that's made me realize that I think I really love about this movie is how effective it is, while also being very minimalist and sparse, and not feeling the need to do all of that. It's just really focused. It's just mostly Malcolm and Cole conversing. That's like 80% of the movie is those two talking to each other, and that's amazing considering how suspenseful it feels in moments, how much that when it does tip into horror. A lot of people call this a horror movie. I don't. I took exception to the fact that this was the highest grossing horror movie for several years until like it basically. I don't think this is a horror movie. It's got some horror elements, but it's like a thriller maybe. I don't even know.
one similar compliment I'd pay it to what it misses out is it's also then therefore very real to the situation, because another example where from a story point of view, all the caveats of seeing it before that I'd give in terms of the script is going, what about like those notes, and what about what was that about? Because at first I'm like, are the notes something to do with his dad? And because his dad's not about, did he die and he's repeating a conversation he'd had with her or something like that? And it felt unresolved. But actually, Cole sees ghosts. He's not being haunted. And there's a big difference. And I think that's another reason why it shouldn't be considered a horror. This isn't a film about a boy being haunted by ghosts. This is a film about a boy who can see ghosts. The reason we don't get a clean-cut resolution to whoever he was, channeling when he wrote those notes is because whoever he was channeling might have gone off somewhere else or might have resolved their issues. Maybe him writing it channeled it out of him and then he moved on, whatever the case may be. Yeah. But it's not like a clean cut thing. I mean, maybe in that way it's kind of ripe for TV, but not because you wouldn't hold the twist back. It's ripe for TV if it's Cole dealing with a ghost. You could almost do a sequelized adult version where it's Cole as an adult going through life, helping people, helping ghosts.
Man, I'd watch
it's kind of pushing daisies.
I would watch the shit out of that. Let me tell you.
And I think it'd be amazing. Yeah. So I think that's another compliment I would pay it. Some of the stuff that's not resolved is because actually the situation, i.e. he sees ghosts, he's not necessarily haunted by them, is, it's true to that.
Yeah, and again, that sort of like lack of need to really go into like it's one of those. Again, actually, another thing about this movie, I think I took away from it when I was younger. I wouldn't have been able to verbalize it the way I'm about to, but that idea of the sublime, the world outside the world. It feels like a big, complicated world that we're just seeing the snippet of that's affecting these characters. So that presumably there's law and rules to how Cole is seeing the ghosts and how it works. But it's irrelevant. It's outside of the view we're seeing because we're seeing the perspective of Malcolm as he enters that world literally and figuratively and like has to navigate it to the best of his understanding and then moves on. And the movie ends when he moves on. Our view of it ends there.
And that comment also highlights why it's not just the twist that affects someone in my position viewing this film. It's also, as much as I hate to say it, and I feel bad for saying it, it's also M. Night's reputation. Because you say that and go, what an amazing choice. And I see it and go, is that a happy accident? Because of his reputation in later scripts. And I fully admit that is unfair. But you got to be honest. And I think that affected my viewing as well.
I do sometimes wonder if you could just chop the opening title sequence off so it doesn't say the name of the movie or the director. So it's just a movie and it opens and it's about Bruce Willis. He's a child psychologist and you've never seen The Sixth Sense, so you don't know what you don't know what this is. Until you get to I See Dead People, you'd probably not been sure what you're watching and you'd probably get sucked right in.
Yeah. And again, I fully admit it's not fair to judge the movie in that way. It's not fair to him. It's not fair to the movie. But I think this isn't about critiquing what's fair. This is about if we rewind these movies and watch them, and that element of it, that stuff comes into play. It's the same, it's the same as why we always have such difficulty reviewing, something like Short Circuit, where there's obviously the problems, but it's like we can't. The problems are a thing on this watch, with the racial side of things. So yeah, I think it's not fair, but M. Night as well is a factor when watching this.
Yeah. Do you want to know an interesting little bit of mid podcast triv, Chris, that I was just thinking about while talking about M. Night?
Sorry, I feel like such a dick for saying all of that because it's not. Sometimes shit happens, and it's a lot of the issues people have with a lot of his later films might not even have been down to him. And by all accounts, the Apple TV series is amazing. I want to. Yeah, I just hope it doesn't seem like I'm being too personal
it's
there.
funny, isn't it? There's a rule. They say there's a rule in filmmaking, which is like when a film bombs, they say you can't have too many of those. But then there's a sub bit that sometimes gets attached to that where they say, unless Hollywood likes you. Oh no, unless Hollywood dislikes you. So basically, if you're a dick, if you're an arsehole and the studios dislike you, you're difficult to work with. The minute you have a bomb, that's their excuse to stop working with you. But if you're actually a nice guy and you're just trying and you're just giving it a go, whether it works or doesn't, as long as you're not difficult and you're easy to work with and stuff, the studios will give you a lot more leeway in terms of lending you money to make movies. Because making movies is gambling. The studio is a guy sat at a slot machine, pulling on that lever and hoping to get some money out the bottom. And every time they choose a director, that's them, and green light a movie. That's them having a big old pull on that lever. And I think it's interesting that I don't know this for sure, but like on all accounts, like bless him, he's. I'm guilty of this too. We did a podcast on this very show, a year ago, where we absolutely blasted his Last Airbender adaptation for all of the terrible choices. But by all accounts, he's supposed to be a very nice guy. And I'm sure he is, and I'm sure that's true, and that he's lovely, and that he's just given it his best. He's made bad choices on many of his movies, but he comes across
well in interviews as well. He comes across like a nice guy. But I don't think it's just the nice guy points. I think you get a lot of points and power the bigger the... So it's not just about the flops, it's also about the success of the successes.
Right.
So, for example, to bring them up again, the Wachowskis, they don't survive Speed Racer, Cloud Atlas, and Jupiter Ascending without The Matrix. And similarly... he's got The Sixth Sense in his arsenal.
And Signs, which was also a big hit, and is great.
Yeah.
I love Signs so much. At some point, Signs will come up on here as well, because I think Signs, genuinely, and you're going to laugh when I say this, but at one point we'll get to it, and I think hopefully you'll agree. I think Signs has one of the scariest scenes ever committed to film in it.
What's the one you want me to watch without dialogue?
The Happening.
Because that's him as well, isn't it?
The Happening. That's the Mark Wahlberg one.
Yeah, but that's M. Night as well, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. Yeah. Sorry, yeah, it is.
Yeah.
So, basically, there was I can't remember who it was. It was like Nando V Movies or someone on YouTube had a theory, and he couldn't prove it, but he reckons The Happening, if you just basically turn the sound off, switch it to black and white, and then play over. He had a specific album he recommended, play an album over it. It plays out perfectly because M. Night is such an effective visual storyteller that the story still makes sense. It's just his dialogue and characterization is sometimes get really clunky and it gets in the way, which is definitely true of his Last Airbender adaptation. I mean, one of our biggest complaints was how on the nose and clunky it all was. He's but if you take the actual dialogue and all the over explaining stuff away, apparently he's convinced it's a masterpiece if you do that. Which is a funny idea. And I was saying to Chris that if we ever actually get around to it on this podcast or any of our others, just test the theory and actually let Chris watch The Happening in that exact way.
I think we'd have to do it for Nothing But Static because that's all about the experiment, not reviewing the experience of watching the movie. Do you know what I mean?
That's true. That's true.
But yeah, I think it's that as well. But
this you got to remember at this stage though. For me, M. Night really was one of my favorite directors. Unbreakable, I loved. Yeah. This I loved. And then Signs comes out, and I saw that in the cinema first day of release, and it was fucking astounding. And
he also had a huge resurgence with not the final one. What was the one before?
He had two films that kind of did it. He had Split. But he also had the really low budget found footage one, The Visit, which was amazing, genuinely brilliant, one of the best films he's had anything to do with in a long time. So he had a couple in a row that were also really good, and then obviously he gave us what was that fucking. What was the
Glass was
the Unbreakable sequel? The Unbreakable Glass. Thank you. Yes, exactly. Glass, which was a fucking piece of shit. And I will say, The Village is fun but deeply flawed. Where it goes off the rail in his career for me, it's Lady in the Water, which is just a mess, top to bottom. There is no there is no getting around the problems that they that Lady in the Water has. It's
Old
bad.
is meant to be quite good, isn't it?
I don't know actually. That's probably the last M. Night film I've not seen. It's his most recent. I haven't had a chance to look at it yet. It's on my list. I don't know what the reviews for Old were. We can have a look if we want. Rotten Tomatoes. Should we have a gander? What do you want to? Do you want to have a guess?
I've pulled it up as well, so it would be. I could try and be cocky. 50% of the.
Yeah, 50% from reviewers and 53% from audiences.
Right, it's a fairly split.
It's pretty split.
No pun intended.
Keep in mind
he's
that
brilliant. He had a great run. The Sixth Sense, Unbreakable Signs, and then we had The Village. So
which The Village is like. I think The Village has some good stuff in it, but it's ultimately quite flawed. I feel like by the time you got to The Village, I at the time put it down to like trying to live up to the expectations of an M. Night movie, because he became known as the guy with the twists. And even though he bucked that somewhat with Signs, it was like, I feel like there was a lot of pressure on him to sort of make an M. Night movie. And The Village is like, it's like him, rather than getting to be creatively free and just do whatever he was particularly interested in, it almost felt like him trying to recreate his own style, like a mimic himself, and that, as a result, it's a fucking weird movie. So maybe at some point we'll do that for fun, because I remember the disappointment of The Village in the cinema as a young person who was a big fan of M. Night at that point, because obviously he'd done 3 movies that I fucking loved up to that point. So yeah, but do you want to know something interesting about this though, about M. Night in that year particularly?
Yes, sorry. What was your piece of trivia?
The reason I am doing this here and not in the main trip is because it's not actually related to this movie. I found this out while researching this movie, and I thought it was interesting. He actually was responsible for 3 scripts that year. 3 of the movies that were released that year, or was involved in them in some significant way. He also was credited as writing on Stuart Little.
Nice.
And his final role that year, writing-wise, of a movie that came out that year, which I think he goes uncredited for, but he was a secret, he was like a ghostwriter, like script doctor-y character that was brought in like initially under the table, like just paid to fix up the script. But you will be surprised to hear, Chris, that it was She's All That.
You know, one day I'm going to pick She's All That for this.
That could be fun. That could also be fun, because I don't think have I ever seen She's All That? I feel like that's one of those movies that if you ask me, I'm like, yeah, I've seen She's All That. But if I actually went back through it, I'd be like, I think maybe I've only seen all, the famous moments from She's All That. The taking the glasses off. Like, I don't actually know if I've ever sat down and watched that movie top to bottom. But yeah, so
wow.
That's a hell of a year for him, isn't it? Right? I mean, also just like, genre-wise, tonally. To jump from The Sixth Sense to Stuart Little to She's All That, that's a hell of a spectrum.
Do you think? In terms of the horror of it all,
yes.
Do you think, in a way, if you were a big horror fan, you'd almost be, because there is a grate that, and it obviously happens really early on.
Yes.
The moment she leaves the room, having just closed all the drawers, and then returns a second later and they're all open again, but he's sat in the same position, is fucking brilliant. And the movie doesn't then maintain, and I think it's a good thing, because I think what it does is better, but the movie doesn't maintain that level of horror. Do you think it's scenes like that give it a reputation for being a horror? And do you think if you went in, you'd get pumped for a horror based on that scene, and then you'd be a bit like, oh.
Yeah, I think it does come back to it in places, but it's not consistent. Like, I mean, I think the tent sequence is pretty creepy for this movie. Like, when he turns around and she's in the tent with him and she's like vomiting, like that's pretty grim. That's the other moment in the movie that always strikes me as being like either horror adjacent or just outright horror. It's just not enough of the movie as that. I think you're right. I think you could be. Yeah, I think definitely it could feel like I feel like a horror fan could sit down and watch this movie not knowing anything about it, back in like 99 or whatever, and be like, oh, are we in for like a Children of the Corn type thing? Is this kid like got psychic powers and going to start like murdering people? Like, where's this going? I mean, I think the reason it gets away with it is because I think the pacing is pretty slow on purpose. So I feel like you kind of know you're not in for a big, like, crazy jump scares out balls to the wall horror film, just from the tone and the pacing of the early sequences. I mean, even the scene where he gets shot, which is just beautifully paced and done. Like, they go up the stairs and there's, like, glass on the floor and the phone's off the hook, and then there's the shadow crosses over them. Like, it's so simple, but so effective, because it's a home invasion all of a sudden. And it's gone from two people just drinking some wine and talking about how one of them's just won an award to a home invasion, like, out of nowhere. And it's and again, if you were to watch this blind, as you know, a lot of people did back at the time in the day, like, that's a really effective scene. Like, I in fact, I suppose you kind of must have seen that scene blind, because I can't imagine you expected it to become a home invasion thing like 2 minutes in. So I imagine you
No, yeah. No, I found that whole thing really effective. It felt like, sometimes you watch an older movie you've not seen before, and it aesthetically, it's filmed on film or something, and just kind of aesthetically, you go, I'm watching a movie. Do you know what I mean? Like, it brings that whole kind of, like, I'm watching a film sensation to you, and I definitely had that for the first, for most of, I suppose for most of this, to be honest with you, and I think that beginning in particular is really effective. The problem is, I hate to sound like a broken record in a minute, we'll just, go to your notes, but the problem is, the minute he's shot, I'm then in my head going, right, he's dead now, no one else can see him but this kid, okay, you know what I mean? So yeah. What are some of your general notes? What do you want to say?
Yeah, so I'd like to talk about a little. Well, let's talk about the music. Actually, let's just hit on the music. I think the music in this movie is, like, stunning. It occasionally, apparently it's sort of designed. The guy that scored it was called James Newton Howard. I don't know a lot about him and what else he's done, and I purposely kind of didn't look, because I was just like, this soundtrack's so good, like. It's not going to, improve or disprove. Like, it's not going to improve my opinion of this score if it turns out he's worked on a bunch of other shit. Although I'm sure he's worked on, like, great things, because this is just an amazing score. But what he did was, apparently he kind of, like, took sounds that sounded like elements from Requiem Mass, which is a Mozart track. Mozart track. Do you remember when Mozart dropped that track, Chris? That hot track, Requiem Mass. Do you remember that? I remember he surprise dropped it on Spotify, and then it was all over TikTok the next day. Whew.
Yeah, people were doing that video where they ate ice cream really quickly to it. Yeah, I remember.
Or that one where they play it really loud, very suddenly, like James, like the James thingy, so James Brown song. I feel good, and they jump out their skin. One of those. No, so that's an orchestral, like, choir piece that was sort of written for a funeral mass, essentially. So it's a really creepy Mozart song in general, and he's kind of hooked into the spirit of that and the sound of that spirit. No pun intended, but I'll take it. That sort of creepy vibe that has, and, like, threaded that throughout all the music of the movie, but obviously also giving it these weird hopeful notes, because, again, as you pointed out, it's not a movie about a boy being haunted. It's about a movie about a boy who can see ghosts, and that is a really specific difference. It's actually a surprisingly uplifting film in the end, I would say. It goes from feeling very hopeless when we meet the original boy whose name I've forgotten. We'll just call him Donnie Wahlberg, because that's who's playing him. The original boy who Malcolm couldn't save, who had the same affliction, and it's just all. And he gets shot, and he's struggling with his wife, and this kid's not doing well at school. He's just being tormented by these things, and no one will believe him. Like that, it's almost like a story in some ways. It's like it's a movie that starts at the midpoint. Normally a movie, by the end of the second act, all the characters are in their lowest point. and then we come up to a happier place. This movie starts at the lowest point and then digs its way out slowly and very effectively. And that's a really interesting structural choice, because it's just miserable for so much at the beginning. So the music is really effective at conveying like how upsetting and how like down this thing is, and then finding like a really hopeful place towards the end. And the music follows that. The scene in the car, which is already, being delivered with absolute, with an acting masterclass from Toni Collette and the kid's name has escaped me, Haley Joel Osment. They're both absolutely just nailing it, but this music underneath just absolutely brings it round. And then the scene where Malcolm realizes what's really going on. Again, the music sells us on the drama of it when he's truly upset, and then brings us around to a sort of a comfortable, accepting place to help bring us to where the character is, which is when there's the initial horror of realizing it and almost denial, and then he thinks back through it, and then there's this like acceptance that leads us to the white that's the end of the movie, which is him presumably moving on.
And that whole last conversation between the two of them, well, not conversation, sorry, but him talking to his wife,
yes,
it feels so uplifting. And you're right, I think it's all about the music basically,
right.
because it's just so effective, and you feel like, really, like you say, you feel really like alive, you feel really like, oh wow, like it's so powerful. And I think the music is probably the reason why, and Bruce Willis is giving a great performance.
Right.
And the decision...
You are obviously invested in the characters at that point as well. I don't want to detract from the script, but the music's really selling it as well.
Yeah, no, and I think actually the scripting, the really smart script decision to have her be in this sort of... Because my interpretation of the scene is that she actually genuinely can hear him, because she's in this fluid, sleepy state where... She thinks she's dreaming, but actually she's not dreaming, and sort of in that state she's able to make contact.
Right. That's how I read it too.
But equally, you could just read it that she's asleep and dreaming, and it works that way as well. The decision to have her asleep means you can have... It's really clever, because you can have that moment of... Oh, look, she's actually communicating with him, but it doesn't break. You get the joy of if she could literally see him without that completely breaking the scene and the movie, and you just going, wait, now she can communicate with the dead? Like, it's a really clever decision.
Yeah, 100% agree. Another note I made repeatedly was just like the details, man. With the attention to detail of this movie is fucking nuts. So, and this is a rewatch thing, so I can't imagine you necessarily noticed this, but Donnie Wahlberg has a weird white tuft of hair. Just a random little small white tuft of hair that they've painted in. I don't know if I guess practically, they just like temporarily dyed a small, couple of strands of his hair. And so does Cole. Cole, if you look, has a little white tuft of hair behind his ear. It's in a different place, but he has it. Now, I believe there's a real thing where if you're traumatized or if you go through a state of trauma, the hair can lose pigment. I've read that somewhere. I don't know how scientifically accurate that is, but that is a thing that is definitely out there. Whether it's actually true or not, I don't know. But it's such a small detail, you'd barely notice it. Yet they went to the trouble to basically dye that little boy's hair, just a small part of it behind his ear, every day before shooting, for a detail most people would miss.
Yeah.
That's incredible.
Do you have in the triv about the red element as well?
I've got a whole... Yeah. I'm not going to read it all, but man, there's a boatload of stuff about the use of red in the movie, which I'm assuming you did a bit of Googling to...
Yeah, so that's on the Wikipedia.
The other thing as well, which I think is really clever, is just the use of the being cold. So at the beginning of the movie, when you're not supposed to yet know it's a ghost movie, the characters are constantly, sometimes overtly, sometimes subtly referencing it being cold. So sometimes a character just walks into a room and goes, "Oh, it's cold in here," and you know why when you rewatch it. But there's just a lot of, in the background, people adjusting thermostats, a lot of people putting on jumpers, just other ways of indicating the temperature has dropped without overtly saying it. And when you watch it back and you realize how many times that happens, because obviously in a lot of these scenes, Bruce Willis is present, Malcolm's present, and it's like, fuck, they really thought that through. So small, but very, very clever. I think as well, all the little details of the things he's doing in the earlier part of the movie that seem abstract or out of nowhere, like grabbing the statue, which seems without context, you're just like, what? And his response to the question of, is there something you want? More like, can I get something I don't want? Which is a great line. I don't want to be afraid anymore. And that hint at the beginning of Donnie Wahlberg's character calling himself Curse, it's basically just really well embedded the whole way through the movie. And again, if you watch the movie knowing where it's going, of course, all that stuff isn't embedding. That's just like, oh, okay, they're talking about the plot that I'm already aware of. But again, I just think it's so cleverly done. And there's so much attention to that detail, which is one of the reasons why when we talked about like the dialogue choices earlier and whether, from your perspective, is it an accident? And from my perspective, it seems very deliberate. It's because so much of this movie seems so deliberate, regardless of M. Night's other stuff. I go, he made a lot of very clear choices here where he specifically, like, you don't do the tuft of hair thing by accident. Right?
No, that's completely
And if
fair.
there's that much thought into that, then presumably I have to assert, and it is, hey, maybe I'm wrong, but my brain assumes that there's that much thought put into all the other elements of it.
Well, also, and I'm probably stealing this from your triv, so apologies, but I thought it was amazing that when I read that every single scene with Bruce Willis, he is either wearing or he has something he wore or touched like just before he died. So like the jacket and actually everything, they managed to, by it being a suit and a jacket, which again is a very clever decision, pointing to, a very clever script, everything, they're able to make it look different by having different stages of kind of where the suit is worn, but actually fundamentally it's everything that he was in contact with just before he died, which again, very clever. Yeah,
it's a really big suit, jacket, vest situation, and he's either just in the shirt, so he's at the very lowest layer of it, or he's got the vest on, which makes it look like a different outfit again, or he's it's wider than that, and he's got the sort of the suit jacket on, or then if he's outside, he's then got the coat on top of that, and by taking and adding any of those 4 or 5 layers, throughout the movie, it looks like he's wearing many, many different outfits, but he never is. And the other thing I think is really clever is the jumper. So he has a jumper that he wears sometimes when he's at home, while you're going through his notes. It's like his more casual look, but I believe that jumper is on the bed, like as if laundry or something, like when he falls on the bed and dies. So that's how they get away with the use of the jumper. Pretty clever.
Yeah, it's very clever.
Very clever indeed. So I just want to give them credit for, like, just fucking hell, the attention to detail in this movie is kind of insane. And the determination that the twist works backwards is why people is one of the reasons I think people cite this movie so, because there are so many movies, particularly, you don't get it much these days because everyone would just say it was absolutely shit and didn't make any sense, but there was a lot, people watched movies a lot more casually in the 80s and beyond, earlier in the 90s even, and earlier, this sort of internet over-analysis of every detail of a movie is just, it was like a thing you went and you casually imbibed and then you went home,
Yeah, because that's fuck TV a lot as well. Like, people, coming up with whole plot theories based on trailers, and Westworld accidentally getting spoiled just because if there's that, it's a numbers game sometimes. If there's that volume of theorizing, someone's going to get something right, and it's kind of like if there's that volume of chatter, if there's that volume of public opinion, shit's going to get spoiled or guessed correctly these days.
And I think what's really interesting in this example is, like, I feel like in this era, or certainly this is on the cusp of an end of an era where making the twist actually make sense when you think about it was not really a concern.
No.
Whatever. It's actually been Earth all along. Has it? Does that make sense? Planet of the Apes? Are you sure? Really?
I thought you were talking about another M. Night movie.
Oh no! But I just mean yeah. So there was plenty of examples of twist endings that just you actually go, if you go back, do they 100% fit? They probably roughly fit, but do they exactly fit? He went to a lot of trouble to make sure that there's no moment in this movie you could look at and go, there you go, they blew it right there. And even to the point where he had to make Bruce Willis apparently is left-handed, but obviously he didn't want to reveal the wedding band. So whenever you see Bruce Willis writing in this movie or circling stuff in his notes, it's always with the right hand, which Bruce had to sort of train to do, because they never want to show you that he's not wearing his wedding ring.
Yeah.
And again, I wouldn't have fucking noticed that. But 10 points for going all the trouble to make that fucking work, because it always makes you think back to that. That story that Mark Hamill tells to Harrison Ford when he's on the set of Star Wars and they're doing a scene after the trash compactor, and Luke's like, well, wait, if we were just in the trash compactor, shouldn't my hair be messed up or whatever? And Harrison Ford's like, look, kid, if they're noticing that, it's the wrong kind of movie, whatever he says, here's some wry remark about how it's not that kind of movie, kid, where details matter. And I just feel like M. Night was very much making the opposite of that. This is a movie where those details really mattered to him, and he put a huge amount of thought and care into every single shot and choice, and every scene in this movie just oozes that to me, and it's such an impressive feat, because even when I first went back to watch this movie a second time, well, I'll be honest, actually, I don't think I necessarily initially went back immediately watched it a second time. What I think I did was rewound back through the movie. And there were scenes I remember looking for, like the scene I was like, I'm sure he was talking to Cole's mum. Sure. Convinced of it. And I found the scene, and Cole enters the house, but they're sat in silence. The implication is they're finishing a conversation, but we don't see it because it's not happening.
Not only that, she then she doesn't act. She doesn't even. And this is again broken record is the difference, because she doesn't even, and it's genius, but because you already know the genius is hidden. Whereas if you've seen it not knowing, the genius is there because you saw it not knowing. Sorry that I'm making that point a lot, but again, it's fascinating to me, because with what's genius about that is she doesn't act in a way that someone's there, because she immediately starts talking to Cole about his day, and does a whole thing about this is what I did, what did you do? Maybe, I don't know if it's that, but she has some sort of conversation with
exactly
Cole. And it's you wouldn't do that with someone sat in the chair. But again, you don't, because you cut to him smiling, and it's he's listening and learning, because you see his interaction with it. I'd imagine if you didn't know, you don't notice that she's not interacting, because you're seeing interaction with that, because you're seeing him interacting with it, which is perfectly allowed, because he can and Cole can, and etc. And even Cole then, the genius of the step thing is Cole's not then talking to himself for half an hour or whatever, because you notice that the mum is not listening to Cole talk to himself, so therefore is not coming in going, what the fuck are you doing? Because he's doing the whole stepping backwards, stepping forward thing.
And then the other one, which I think I only noticed on this viewing, and it's so small, but I go, oh, that's kind of clever too. She says, she talks about what they're going to have for dinner, and then she says, you've got an hour. And the reading of it, if you're watching it cold, is, I've phrased it not exactly as she does, but something like that, is, he's an hour session with his child psychologist.
Yeah.
But the reality is she's saying, you've got an hour to dick about until dinner.
Yeah. I will say, nitpicks though.
Go on.
Quite a fancy, spacious hall and living room, isn't it, compared to the kitchen?
Yeah. No, I found that. Yeah, they wanted. It's clear that his determination for the details to all fit and make sense clearly ends at, does the shot look worse if I
I mean, there's a shot later on where it feels like quite a cramped living space. But in those scenes particularly, you're like, oh, is that actually quite a nice place to live in?
Yeah. No, I agree. Yeah, that is a proper trip to nitpick corner because it's 100% there and an issue, but it's like pretty inconsequential. But I agree, it's kind of strange because that living room looks really fancy and nice, and like it's a big open hallway, and it seems like it has a high ceiling, and like you're just like, wait a minute, what's this stinky little room they were in eating dinner? They should eat dinner in the living room because that's fucking massive. Yeah, 100% agreed.
It feels like in the kitchen scenes they need to feel like quite a poor family going through, like, do you know what I mean? Maybe they've got money troubles. Maybe you need to feel their woes. And then there's other scenes where you're like, well, move into a smaller place for one. There's two of you.
Yeah. 100%.
But yes, that is absolutely nitpick.
In my notes, I just noticed I don't know why I did this. I literally, Chris, typed out the fucking scene in the car 3 separate times on 3 separate lines in all caps. So apparently I really enjoyed the scene in the car.
Oh, it is. And like I said, again, my criticism of that started with what a great fucking scene.
I mean, like everything about that scene I think is so clever because like it's that whole idea of it, like how he gets into it as well is also clever. The reason they're stuck in the car is there's been an accident ahead of them. That makes perfect sense. The fact that Cole knows there's been an accident, and when he says there's been an accident, someone died, she's like, oh my God, can you see that? She's like looking for the, ahead to see if like, oh, can he see a body from where he sat? Like, that's horrible. And then like the cut back to Cole and you can just see the dead cyclist ghost next to him. Like, genius.
What is nuts, by the way.
What's that, sorry?
So go on. Well, related to that, what's crazy, Dan, is we're an hour and 12 minutes into recording, and we've not really talked about how incredible Toni Collette and Harvey.
Well, I was good. Yeah, my next and like sort of final overall note was about the acting. Yeah, 100%. And this scene is a great way to talk about it because it is a fucking masterclass. This kid, and Toni Collette, who is already, one of the greatest working actresses on the face of this earth, and fucking don't at me. It's just you. If you don't agree with that statement, you are wrong.
Well, Dan Merle always claims that she was robbed of an Oscar for what was that film she did recently, and his whole thing is like the Oscars not recommending.
Was it Hereditary?
Genre. Hereditary, yeah. He's like, it's the Oscars snobbery at certain genres robbed her of an Oscar for Hereditary.
I felt so smug watching Hereditary because obviously being a fan of this film growing up, I've always held Toni Collette in quite high esteem, and she's been in a bunch of stuff. She's done very well. She's always good, but she doesn't get. Well, I feel like that table is turning a little bit. Actually, the last couple of years, I feel like she's gotten a lot more recognition for her work. But like, she definitely was just like one of those working actresses that was just kind of there for a while, and she was getting roles and doing good work, but like going relatively unrecognized. And I remember I was watching Hereditary, and it was just like this opportunity for her to be just amazing for 2 hours of one of the best movies made in the last like 20 years or whatever. I was just like, she's amazing, and now everyone can see it. Like, finally. And there was so much, stuff online about how good she is in that movie, and I'm like, yeah, I fucking knew it. I knew it, you bastards. Yeah. All along.
But not in the eyes of the Academy.
Evidently not, no. Hereditary got robbed in general. Like, Hereditary was incredible, and yeah, the lack of, awards recognition for Hereditary was upsetting. Anyway, different issue. Yeah, she's a much younger actress, 20 years removed or whatever from Sixth Sense now, but like, back then she was still just amazing, and the emotion she conveys is so raw and so real when he starts talking about the stuff with the grandmother. And that stuff with the grandmother is amazing because it's like hit after hit after hit. He says one thing that would almost certainly upset her because it's almost like because initially she thinks he's obviously making it up, and that's really horrible. You can't pretend you've spoken to a dead person. Like, that's very disrespectful. So she goes through a whole gamut of emotions there, from like not believing him and being upset that he's doing this, to being upset when she realizes the truth, to being upset about what it is he's actually telling her. And it's like, every time he says something else and she seems to either get more or less upset or what she's upset about shifts, I'm like, kid, stop it. You're going to kill this woman. Like, this is savage. Like, you can see what she's going through. Stop talking.
It's also amazing because as good as the script is in that scene, she has to go through a whole range of, not believing him,
right.
not wanting to believe him, hearing evidence that makes her believe him, to completely believing him and being affectionate for him. Like, in the hands, even with that script, because I think the script of that scene is fantastic. My issues were never with the scene. It was you were talking about the way it was embedded and set up earlier in the movie. Yeah. Completely. But in the hands of lesser actors, I think that scene wouldn't be as effective because of the sheer the sheer range of heightened emotions conflicting with each other that she has to take us through in that scene. But you believe it because of her. Even she's not in the film that much, but even Olivia Williams, that sounds really offensive, but with not much, even Olivia Williams is stunning in this film.
Yeah, she's great. She's really good in this film too. The cast top to bottom are pretty amazing. I mean, to be fair, I think it's interesting because while I do consider this one of the ones Bruce clearly actually gave a shit about, I am interested because I do wonder about this one because it is quite a stoic character. His character is a person that is trained by the very nature of the way this character is designed, trained to not be always giving away his emotions in a scene, right? Because a psychiatrist reacting to what you're saying in any way, shape, or form would be bad form, right? They need to be neutral and passive a lot of the time. So when he's talking to Cole and he's just being stoic and Bruce Willis, sometimes I'm going, that's brilliant acting, and sometimes I'm going, is that brilliant acting, or did Bruce just kind of doze off on the set with his eyes open? There are definitely a few scenes where I wondered which it was. And that's really bad to say, and I don't want to assume the same way we were talking about earlier about maybe it's not fair to assume the intent with M. Night here because of his other work. I know that there are times Bruce Willis shows up to the set and doesn't give a fuck, and depending on the movie, and he sort of makes a decision whether he's turning up or not, and can switch it on whenever the fuck he wants. And if you want evidence of that, please dig out Kevin Smith's from a Q&A, his whole 20-minute thing about Bruce Willis. It's an amazing story for a start, but what it was like to work with Bruce Willis on the set of Cop Out, really eye-opening for what Bruce Willis is like. But I must admit, he's great in this movie, but I did wonder, is that just because they gave him quite a stoic part that he didn't need to sell it, he needed to be understated, not overstated?
Yes, but I think you're thinking there specifically, and your references are specifically the stuff with Cole. I think he shows he's trying any scene which involves his wife.
Right.
Because, when he's watching the tape, when he thinks she's, in his eyes, going off with another man, all of that stuff, he shows more range, and, it's a good level of subtlety, not stoicness. I think his.
No, I agree with that.
In some ways, it gets the most attention. Him with the kid, but in some ways, him with his wife is his best acting in the film.
Yeah, I think you're actually right. Especially because, I think about that last scene. He's the one who delivers the speech. Her reaction to it is very. But yeah, you're right, 100%.
Yeah, and the jealousy and stuff, and the way he portrays anger with the other dude. I mean, doesn't he? I mean, there is a scene where doesn't he call him like a cheese wad or a cheese dick or something? Yeah. Very Bruce Willis.
Yeah, keep walking, cheese dick, something like that.
Yeah, which just felt like it was ripped out of. For a second, I went, "Oh, am I watching Die Hard?" Yeah. Like it just.
It was like that was the day that M. Night Shyamalan said, "Can you just give me 10% John McClane for this one?" Can you just get a little John McClane out of you for this one? And he was just like, sure, kid. And he just did it.
That's for you, M. Night. You're right, by the way. I didn't jump on that it's too fat for 40 is the special with that story in.
Right. It's a really look. It's a great. It's a really interesting insight into Bruce Willis. And obviously two sides to every story. Don't believe everything everyone says ever, but it does fit with other accounts. And it also fits with something we're going to talk about in a few minutes relating to this movie. We'll come back to that.
It's funny, the Bruce Willis, Kevin Smith stuff, because Kevin Smith has a lot of, in his early, evening wids and stuff, there's a lot of stuff about Tim Burton, there's a lot of stuff about Prince, there's, all this sort of stuff. As he's got older, and I feel like since Prince passed away, he hasn't been... He very, very rarely is negative about anything, but in particular, he doesn't do that anymore. He doesn't do the people stories in the way that he used to do back in the day with those evening wids, except with Bruce Willis, where he is consistently like, oh yeah, that was a tough experience. And I think he's so consistent with Bruce Willis in light of changing it with everyone. And like you say, it's so backed up by stuff that you kind of go, wow. There's two versions of every story, but I think Kevin definitely felt that way.
Yeah. So let's quickly wrap up the film, because some of that stuff's going to come up in the trip. So let's, so the acting, amazing, music, incredible. For me, I think it's one of the tightest scripts. It's definitely M. Night's tightest script, I would say. I appreciate the pacing and the subtlety of it, and a lot of the choices to make it a sort of slow, plodding sort of mystery about essentially a child psychologist and a child who's going through trauma. But it also is this kind of beautiful story of a mother and son sort of having that having a barrier between them, and this psychologist helping him deal with that, while the kid also helps the psychologist deal with his stuff. It's great. For me, it's pretty awesome. I'm still a huge fan. So what do you think your Jerry's final thought on this one is? Because I imagine you've got a lot of complicated feelings about this movie, because as we've established, your viewing experience not optimal in any way, shape or form, but obviously still some legitimate criticisms which probably muddle things, and it's hard to know, I guess, from your perspective when you're thinking it through, you're going, is this a legitimate criticism? How much has this been affected? You must be not doubting, but you must be sort of 50-50 on even your criticisms of going, which ones are affected by my viewing and which ones are just legit. I would struggle in your shoes to make what I would consider an objective an opinion about the film. So I guess just your honest sort of regardless of objectivity, based on the viewing you had, what are your sort of final thoughts on the film?
I'm laughing because not in any way do I think deliberately on your part, but that was I started picturing the scenario of the director of an episode of the Jerry Seinfeld show going, right, Jerry, the camera's on you now. We're ready for your final thoughts, Jerry, in 3, 2, 1, and then just stepping in front of the camera and going, what we've learned today is that if you're going to have a burger, because it was basically, you went, what are your final thoughts? I'd imagine, and then just inadvertently gave my entire final thoughts.
Well, no, because I was trying to basically prevent you from having to say it again and say, I know, broken record. Yeah, but I was also trying to get that stuff out of the way and say, well, just with all that removed, what are your final thoughts? So you don't have to basically go through that stuff again. So I was trying to be helpful, and sorry if I stepped on what you were actually going to say.
No. Just I wanted to explain why I was laughing. I didn't want to seem rude. As I started, I know it wasn't deliberate. It just made me laugh once I started picturing that Jerry Springer thing. But it's so weighted by that dude. I agree with everything you have said. I agree with all the compliments on the music, the genius of the script, and I fully accept, as part of the discussion, and even in some ways in kind of how I introed it, it is my viewing experience is so overshadowed by knowing, and I think it's that thing we talked about of the genius, because the genius of that scene with the mum is a real good example of it. The genius is when you go back and watch it, you go, that's what I didn't see. Whereas it's so hard to appreciate that genius because I'm not looking out for what I didn't see, because I'm looking out for what I've seen, because I know. And I think that overshadowed my viewing, and would overshadow the viewing of someone that knows. But that doesn't take away from the film itself, which is a masterpiece.
So I guess in a
think,
weird way,
yeah.
me sort of saying like, oh, with all that aside, because there's really no way for you to put that aside, I guess is what we're getting at.
No, because and maybe there are people out there, if someone's listening to this and going, well, I knew, and that didn't affect my viewing, fair play, that's awesome. But personally, it affected mine. But I think,
did you watch it with Jess, by the way, or did you watch it alone?
No, I watched it alone. I kind of wish I had watched it with Jess in a way. I think she'd have felt the same way as me. But I don't know.
Yeah.
But it is a masterpiece, and I do put that to putting it aside. I agree with everything you've just said. But it is hard for me to put it aside.
No, I understand. Yeah, I understand. Especially if your sort of experience with M. Night is just, the troubled years. If you've not seen a lot of his best movies, you've only come across him through Last Airbender and
I think I've only seen Last Airbender.
Right, which is just a shit show, top to bottom. Yeah, that's fair. Well, maybe at some point we'll do Unbreakable then, because I really like Unbreakable. I still stand by Unbreakable as a really great film, and I think Signs is probably the most flawed of the 3 first films he did. But again, Signs has one of the genuinely scariest film scenes I've ever seen.
Yeah, and by all accounts, Split is phenomenal as well.
Split's great. Split is really good. Very pulpy. Not like this in terms of it being sort of like slow and thoughtful and character based, but it is still very, very good. Really fun sort of genre movie. Anyway, let's triv it up, as you would say, Chris.
Triv it up.
The role was written with Bruce Willis in mind. That was kind of always the thought. We'll get back to why that was an option for him in a minute. In the early drafts of the script, Malcolm was actually going to be a crime scene photographer, not a child psychologist. I assume those versions of the script were clunky, because how do you explain him keep talking to this child?
That's fair.
I mean,
that wouldn't have been good.
It's almost all of the movie. And I think it
wouldn't have worked at all.
I suspect not. So, that's part of the process. We work these things out as we rewrite, and we go, oh yeah, that doesn't actually function. So yeah, smart to have changed that, I think. David Vogel, the president of production at Walt Disney Studios, had read the spec script and instantly loved it. Without obtaining corporate approval, he actually bought the rights to the script
this is madness.
Then. You've heard about this, I assume.
Yeah, it's nuts.
So basically, he paid $3 million. And it also came with the stipulation that Shyamalan would direct the film. So by buying it with that stipulation attached, they had no choice. Disney were not convinced this was a good option and a film that they should be making. But they didn't obviously make it under the Disney banner. It was the Buena Vista, or whatever it's called, that old sort of like side hustle that Disney had. But they've since shut down, but they used to make movies through it. They were not at all happy with his choice to buy it without their approval. In fact, the script sold in record time. It went on the market and was sold within 13 hours or something stupid like that, which is like a record. And the reason that that's a record is because obviously he didn't have to consult the people above him. He just bought it. The problem then became that Disney weren't happy, fired him immediately, and then they sold a huge percentage of the film's rights to Spyglass Entertainment, who then put up a lot of the money for production, with the idea being they would then get the higher percentage of the profit. And when I say higher percentage, I mean Disney got 12% of the box office of this film, and no more. Now,
wow.
To say that was a mistake on Disney's part is an understatement.
My big question at stories like that,
yeah,
and then stories like I'm always meaning to look it up to see whether it's hearsay, but didn't the story go that the guy that commissioned the Lost pilot got fired because it was the most expensive pilot ever made and stuff like that? I always go, please tell me they got like rehired by someone else or like snapped up, that wasn't the end of their career because people went, oh yeah, no, we fucked this one. Let's get back. You were right.
Yeah, I would have to look into it, but yeah, isn't that crazy? So he took a risk, was absolutely spot on, and Disney was so upset by his choice and so unconvinced of the movie, they fired him and sold basically all of any profit they might make from this script to a different production company. And the irony being that it was kind of a sleeper hit. So Entertainment Weekly do like a, films of the summer preview every year. And they listed 134 films that were coming out in summer 1999. And The Sixth Sense was not mentioned once.
Fuck it hell.
It wasn't on that list at all. No one thought this movie was going to make any money at all. And then it came, and it was made for $40 million. And it made $673 million at the box office, making it the second highest grossing film of '99 behind Phantom Menace. And as I mentioned earlier, some of the other films that came out that year were like Toy Story 2 and stuff. And it's like, how? Like, there was a James Bond movie out that year, Chris. And it still came second.
Huge year for movies.
Yeah. And The Matrix. And it was a huge... But then it was, on top of it making $673 million at the box office, it then became an absolute massive hit in the home video market because word of mouth. Basically, the movie shipped more than 2.5 million copies to rental stores, and they estimate was rented by about 80 million people in 2000, making it the year's top rented VHS /DVD title. So Disney got 12% of that because they sold it.
And you kind of go, yeah, deserved.
Yeah, I don't want to phrase it this way too often, but Chris, they fucked it. They fucked it. There's no other way to slice that decision. Now, what's really interesting is it's not exactly clear what Disney ended up paying for the production. It may have just been Bruce Willis, because I don't know if you're aware of this, Chris, but as a result of a disastrous, abandoned, half-filmed romantic comedy with Bruce Willis and Demi Moore called Broadway Brawler, Bruce Willis was legally obligated to make 3 movies for Disney. Legally obligated. So
why? What were the? By the way, I'm going. I can still hear you, but I'm desperate for the loo. I'm going to nip but this sounds fascinating. Go on. What's the story there? How?
So basically, Bruce Willis was making a movie in co-production with Disney, and he was acting as the producer. And it was going to be a romantic comedy, as I mentioned, with Demi Moore, and it was called Broadway Brawler. The production was an absolute nightmare that devolved into, and I don't want to get it, I could spend all day going through the accounts of what happened on the set of Broadway Brawler. But lots of arguments, lots of not being very productive, huge amounts of money wasted, and in the end, Bruce Willis, on the set, fired the director and most of the crew, because he was also a producer as well as a star. In the end, production shut down, and Disney were out of pocket $17 million, which is, and I quote, no, I don't quote, I quote myself, fucking madness. So there was instantly talk of legal action against Willis. Disney, he owed them $17 million in a lot of ways because he didn't finish the movie they were paying him to make. So the parties eventually came to an agreement where Bruce Willis signed a special guaranteed 3-picture deal so he couldn't refuse the movies for a reduced fee. I think the numbers I saw were that it was at that point he was taking, because he was a big star, Die Hard and all that stuff, he was taking like $20 million per movie. I believe they halved his fee. So he was only taking $10 million per movie. The idea being that Disney would save roughly $30 million across the 3 pictures, and therefore would consider themselves compensated for the shit show that was.
What's crazy about that to me is it's not the reduced fee. He couldn't refuse the movies.
Nope. Fuck. Right. And that is how we ended up with.
Do you want to know which the fee thing?
Do you want to know which 3 movies were the 3 movies?
Yeah.
He was then forced to star in Armageddon, The Sixth Sense, and everyone's favourite Disney classic, The Kid. Do you remember The Kid, Chris?
No, I don't remember The Kid. But like,
bad movie.
I'm sorry, and I know Armageddon has its flaws,
right? But
it's incredible to me that 2 of those films were roaring successes.
Right? Yeah, good point. Well, Armageddon was a
nuts.
dice roll though, because they knew Deep Impact was in production. So with they were rushing that one out. Like they were like, that movie was its own interesting. Like, it's kind of a miracle that movie is watchable at all, because they were desperate to get it to market prior to Deep Impact.
I just think that's surely the deal you sign is, all right, look, I'll do 3 movies within 5 years for half my fee. But to be like, all right, whatever, what you got, right, okay, cool. And it just feels like Disney just treated The Sixth Sense as like, what? All right, give it to Spyglass. What?
Exactly.
All right, give it to Willis.
Correct.
Like, just
yeah, it feels like they were unsure of the movie. They didn't want to contribute to the production, because they didn't think it would make any money. But they had Bruce Willis on the hook for a much reduced fee, and thought, well, if we're going to have to put money into this, let's see if we can turn a small profit by putting a star in it. Maybe it'll at least sell some tickets if you can put Bruce Willis's name and or face on a poster. That's how it seems to me. So, I mean, yeah. I mean, some of the ins and outs of that are, slightly speculative, but the fact of the matter is he did sign that 3-picture deal to make up for the money lost. The money lost, I've seen a few different figures on how much money was lost on Brooklyn Brawler. I suspect it might even be more than has been suggested, but the highest end version of it I've seen was 20 million, and the lowest end version of it was 15. So the number that came up the most was 17, which is somewhere in the middle, so I guess that's probably about right. But so some of these facts are slightly off, but like, this seems to be almost exactly what happened, and it was very heavily reported at the time. And of course, yeah, the 3 movies he then made for Disney or Disney subsidiaries were Armageddon, Sixth Sense, and then The Kid. Yeah, madness. Absolute madness. So I said I'd come back to it. When it says that he wrote the script with Bruce Willis in mind,
yeah, fair enough.
I wonder.
Yeah.
Maybe he rewrote the script with Bruce Willis in mind, because Disney went, that's all that's happening here? I don't know. Interesting.
That whole thing, man.
Is that not one of the most
crazy.
insane stories we've told in the trivia?
Yeah, I mean, still for me, I still want to, like, if I could make any show, it's part, and I'd call it, it's too long, but I'd even call it part man, part robot, all cop, or whatever it was.
Right.
Like, that's what that show would be called, and it'd be about the making of RoboCop. But
I'd call it That Fucking Suit. Because, like, do you remember, like, 80% of the trivia was about how many problems that suit created on set?
Yeah.
Anyway, let's get some of the other trivia out of the way. But that one, I was like, that is gold. I made a
that
note
is phenomenal,
of that
man.
We've talked about this before, Chris, because last year we did our quiz episode with Ronnie on Nothing But Static, and one of the rounds was about funny titles they gave movies in different countries.
Oh, yeah.
And this movie in China was literally called He's a Ghost.
Oh, yeah.
And on the poster, they put the title above Bruce Willis's head. Just in case you weren't sure.
Even, like, I See Dead People is better than that.
Right.
Do you know what I mean? Like...
Insane.
Oh,
So, according to Michael Cera, this was actually the first film he ever auditioned for when he was a little babby. He would have been about the age of Cole, so about, somewhere between like 9 and 11, which I think was the casting range for this movie. The scene that they were doing for the audition was the magic trick scene, but he later admitted that he hadn't read the script fully and didn't understand the tone of the movie and played it very cheerfully like it was a comedy, because he didn't understand that Cole was supposed to be an introverted and quiet boy. So he played it a bit big and has admitted that he absolutely fucked it and it's his own fault he didn't get that movie.
I want to see a remake where he's in it, but he doesn't play Cole. He plays Bruce Willis's part.
Yeah. Michael Cera's Malcolm. I love it. So apparently there's a few reasons that Haley Joel Osment got the role of Cole. But the ones that have been cited over the time, obviously M. Night has repeatedly said he was the best person that auditioned, but the other two reasons is he's the only boy that went to the auditions wearing a tie. Apparently that made him stand out for some reason to M. Night. And then this third one, I do kind of love this story, was that apparently when they did the scene, which was presumably just the penny scene, the magic trick scene, Which, by the way, we haven't really talked about it because it is in my notes. This movie is really funny, like out of nowhere, 4 or 5 times. The magic trick scene isn't that funny, but the payoff when he does it at the kid's party, and the other kid's like, "I don't get it." And he's like, "It's supposed to be funny." That made me chuckle. But the other one that really got me, to give this movie some credit for its comedy, is when it's the play, and the play starts, and every parent in the crowd gets out of camera. That made me chuckle so much. It's so eerie and very funny. So anyway, different comment, but yeah. So he auditioned presumably with the magic
We
tricks.
haven't talked about that actually, by the way. Can I just say I love the notion that once he starts listening to the ghost and helping them, it also helps him socially and stuff at school. That's
it's lovely.
A beautiful idea.
Yeah, that was lovely. I enjoyed that too. Because he's not scared anymore. Like when you think back through all of his behaviors, it's because he's constantly terrified. He's being like he's haunted at school. Or I say haunted. We've already made that distinction. But he's seeing ghosts at school. Like every day of that kid's life is a horror movie up until that point. Like no wonder he was introverted and quiet, you know. And we haven't really talked about it, but the stuttering Stanley scene is one of the best scenes in the movie as well.
Yes, yeah.
Where the teacher is sort of like asking about the history of the building they're in, and Cole knows the real story, but it's obviously wasn't recorded that way. And the teacher tells him he's wrong, but then he gets some information about the teacher and he uses it against him. Oh, it's incredible! What a fucking brilliant scene. Anyway, I
love that they do have to slip in later that he went to the school, and like people died and stuff to explain why a ghost would know that. Like,
right? Yeah, that's a bit. Yeah, oh yeah, the fire. There'd been a fire in that wing of the school or whatever. Yeah, I remember. So,
which is also another great moment of comedy where he's like, there was a fire in this part of the theatre, and he's just like, I know, because
again, the movie surprised me. I'd forgotten that this movie had jokes of any kind in it. Like I remember it being a relatively dour affair, but like the cheese dick line, the cameras thing, that like it's all. I
don't think the cheese dick line is that funny, but yeah, I know what you mean.
It's funny because it's so out of. I guess what's funny about that is that it doesn't feel like that was in the script. It feels like Bruce Willis just made that up on the spot. Anyway, so he does his reading, magic scene, and then M. Night asked him, had you read the rest of the part? And he says, I read it 3 times last night. And Shyamalan, impressed, is like, oh wow, you read your sections 3 times. He goes, no, I read the whole script 3 times. So I guess flattery is the best way to get a role.
I was going to say, like this to me just sounds like good parents. Like this is some parents that told the boy to do his prep before his interview. Like,
agreed. Yeah,
I was always, because my parents were like that. I remember I went for a job at a news agents, and they were like, "You got to wear a tie," and I was like, I mean, I don't think I do. I wouldn't be wearing a tie working there. It was like literally lifting boxes and stuff.
Yeah.
And they were like, no, it's an interview, so you need to wear a tie. And it feels like, maybe I'm being unfair. Maybe it was absolutely him. But it feels like there was someone going, right, do your homework. Like, as in on the script and
read the script. Yeah. Read it multiple times, get familiar with it, understand the character. Yeah. And then make sure you wear a fucking tie. Yeah, no, agreed. Toni Collette has said that she was moved by the story's emotional resonance, and it wasn't even really aware it was a horror film until after its release. I would actually, I would imply that, or suggest, sorry, that she's, she was right initially. I don't think it really is a full horror film, but I understand. According to M. Night Shyamalan, Donnie Wahlberg lost 43 pounds to play the role of Vincent Gray. That's the character's name, Vincent Gray. You can tell he's lost a lot of weight for that role, and it's a super great performance out of nowhere. It's just like it's one scene in the movie, but it's super harrowing, and he does a great job playing an unhinged man who's been tormented his whole life. And when you watch that scene as well, knowing exactly what Cole's gone through, it plays really powerfully as well, because you sort of understand. It's the what could have been for Cole. So it plays quite differently. Very good. Several members of M. Night's family are doctors, which is the reason he makes a cameo in this movie as a doctor. It's a little tribute to his
I
family.
thought that was him. I was like, is that M. Night? Yeah.
Yeah. He has a running trait that he cameos in all of his movies. Did he cameo? Maybe he didn't cameo in Last Airbender. I can't remember that movie. I've purged it from my brain. But he has a very brief appearance in pretty much every movie he's made, except for Lady in the Water, in which he cast himself as God, which is a recurring thing people make fun of. A writer that literally like has the power to shape and change the world. Like he basically casts himself as a godlike figure. It's incredible. We'll come back to that. Because
a godlike creature that he's given the same profession as himself to as well.
Yeah. It's not great. Anyway, we'll come back to that. Wow. Because at some point we must do Lady in the Water, because that movie is an absolutely fascinating catastrophe. It's one of the most interesting disasters I ever remember seeing in a cinema. So yeah, we'll definitely come back to that. I think Lady in the Water might be more discussion worthy than The Happening. So,
yeah, like I say again, the Happening. If that's the black and white thing, we've got to do that as an experiment on Nothing But Static one day instead.
So the entire movie was filmed in sequence. They literally did all the scenes in the order they would appear. Interesting choice. Not really sure why, but yeah.
Cool. Does that mean including? So they did the beginning of the death and then went back at the end and did the end of the death, or?
Yeah. No, I guess with that one they filmed the whole thing on the day. That one they must have filmed the whole thing.
You got to assume, haven't you?
Yeah. But other than that, it was
pick at your trivia, but.
Yeah. No, you're right. That wouldn't make any sense for them to go back to film that. But everything else filmed in sequence as it would appear, which is an interesting choice. I guess with a movie like this, where it's a lot of just people talking in rooms, there's really no reason to shoot it non-sequentially.
Well, there's exterior shots though, with like where from a production standpoint.
Yeah, you'd want to gather them all together, wouldn't you? Normally.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, they chose to shoot it in sequence.
Oh well. Wow.
One thing.
You know why, Dan? Because Disney didn't give a shit. Disney looked at the schedule and were like, "We could do this in a month, and we're doing it in 2. Fuck it, whatever."
Yeah. M. Night's got this weird idea he wants to do it in sequence. Whatever. Who gives a shit? Also, a tiny bit of credit actually. When I flick the movie back on, one of my first thoughts is, if this kid thinks he's a ghost, does the kid not react scared when he first meets him? I couldn't remember how they first met, and rewatching that sequence, that was fun.
Yeah, he runs away. Yeah,
he runs away. He literally runs away into a church. Like it's like, oh yeah, okay, forgot about that. Anyway, we've already talked about this, but the producer Frank Marshall thought that they gave the game away midway through the movie when they push in on Bruce Willis's face while Cole says, "I see dead people." Fortunately, none of the audiences in test screenings or afterwards picked up on it, so they left it in the movie. But they were debating it at that point, whether it was too much. So there you go. On the theme of giving away the ending, like the Chinese title and poster for the movie, if you get this, if you happen to pick up the score to this movie on CD, and I imagine not a lot of people did. It's beautiful music in the film. I don't know if I'd want to just listen to it unless maybe I was writing myself or something and I wanted the tone. I can't think of any reasons you'd want to listen to this music apart from the movie, but the CD did exist, and the final song on the CD is titled "Malcolm is Dead." It's fucking brilliant. I mean, look, that's what's happening.
That's quite common, though, isn't it, with film soundtracks?
Well, there's been a couple of famous examples. I think the most famous example is actually weirdly from the same year. Is it not? Wasn't it Phantom Menace had a track? And spoilers for Phantom Menace for anyone who hasn't seen it, but wasn't there a track called like Qui-Gon's Demise or something like that?
Yeah, see, it
gave
should
away
be
that
like
Qui-Gon Jinn died or whatever.
But I suppose even like Malcolm Moves On even is still quite spoilery, isn't it? Like, yeah, I suppose what do you call it? But well, maybe you call it like
you could call it
something
acceptance.
I had to do. Or no, even that's a little. I think how he's been helping, or something I had to do, or
honestly, anything less overt would have been nice.
Well, actually, you know what it should be. It should be good night, my love.
Right, perfect.
Yeah.
Perfect.
But he shouldn't be Malcolm is Dead.
Yeah, you could literally have named it Song 17 or Track 17. Like it wouldn't have, like it would have been better than calling it Malcolm is Dead.
It's phenomenal. Love that.
Calling it This Movie Isn't Very Good would have been better than Malcolm is Dead. Like, and even though that would have been like a weird thing to do to shit on the movie, but like that still would have been better than giving away the ending. Anyway, I've already talked about this, but when circling a passage in his notes, Bruce Willis does so with his right hand. Willis is actually left-handed, but had to learn how to write right-handed so that the viewers wouldn't see the wedding band was no longer on his hand. He also, if you're interested in this sort of thing, he draws the circle clockwise, which is what a left-handed person does, where a right-handed person would draw it counterclockwise. So there you go.
Nice.
Let's see. Oh, apparently, when Cole and Malcolm are entering Kaya's bedroom at her wake, by the way, played by a very young Misha Barton. Don't know if you noticed that. But
was that who she played? Like, I saw her name in the credits.
Right.
Or on the Wikipedia or something. And I was kind of like looking out for her and then forgot about it at the end. But it's funny, when we started talking, I was like, because I nearly made a point about it's the fucking longest intro credits ever. Like,
I know.
like
I think if you go like we talked about this before. The trend back then was to have the credits at the beginning. Like, do you remember the Space Jam ones? They go on for like 5 minutes.
Yeah. That's fair. But I was like, yeah, I did think as we started recording today, I was like, there was someone in it who I was like, really, they're in it, and then couldn't see him in it. But yeah, it was her.
Yeah.
So no, I didn't clock it, but I clocked the names.
Yeah. So when they head in, she's so young, she doesn't really look like her. Like it's
No.
Yeah. She's a child in this, but it's still she's very good in it. Very creepy as that girl when she needs to be creepy, and then very sympathetic when the tone switches. So a great little performance. She's not in a huge amount of the movie, but she does very well with what she has. Hold on,
what do you mean the tone switches? She's always sort of creepy, isn't she?
When she hands him the tape, less so, I feel. She's kind of sympathetic. She's sick and in her room and vulnerable, and she hands him. She pushes the tape from under the bed. I didn't find her creepy in that scene. I kind of found her a bit of a sympathetic character at that point because I was kind of like, "Oh, you just need help. Something's gone wrong."
That's fair. Yeah, no, that's fair.
Yeah.
You know what? I think that scene doesn't need. It doesn't need the over. Cole helping the dad is enough. We don't need to then go, and he saved the sister's life, which is sort of what the scene's implying.
Yeah, because there's a background line. There's a line of dialogue that like you overhear as you're passing, where someone's like, "And I've heard that the younger daughter's getting sick too." And it's like, it's a little.
Yeah,
much.
And then we see the younger daughter, and they have a nice moment, and it's like, you don't need that. That's
But I like it though because I again, it's like it's Cole doing something that makes him happy, which is like helping others, and like he's clearly it's one of those things again. Early in the movie, he's describing Donnie Wahlberg's character, Vincent Gray, and he says, "Oh, you're compassionate. You were so compassionate." And like when you think back to that line when you've seen the movie and you realize that Cole was just a kid who cared about people and like had no way of expressing that, it all sort of loops around.
And it's nice, I suppose, because actually, I do sort of take it back because it's the girl who died. My interpretation is it was never about getting justice. It was never about her dad knowing.
Right.
For her, it was about saving her sister.
Right. Yes. Very good. And by having the and I hear this the other daughter's getting sick now too. Oh, it's terrible, and then having him go to her with the thing. Oh, she knows you always liked this, and giving it that sort of makes that clearer. I agree. Yeah, that's a really good point.
How less creepy is it though, knowing that in between the scene of her first appearing and then that scene, there must have been a scene where she said to Cole, "Right, this is the address. If you get the bus from 478, then you like." She doesn't speak, but she had to give him the facts at some point.
That's a really good point. Yeah, that's again about like the sparseness and minimalist nature of the film. I feel like sometimes doing little is enough. Like, yeah, you're right, because that would not be a good scene. You wouldn't want that scene in the movie because it would be awkward and weird.
No, of course not.
It would hurt the tone. But anyway, my point. Oh God, we've gotten off track so many times. When they enter her room, Malcolm is standing directly behind Cole. However, when the camera cuts to the shadows on the floor as the door opens, you can only see one shadow.
Oh, wow, nice.
That's a nice detail that I never picked up on, even on this most recent viewing. And when I read that, I then went back and looked. because I was like, what? I'll tell you another scene that I very quickly, that I found funny. The wedding ring scene made me chuckle.
Why?
The one, no, there was. Sorry, I've realised there was obviously a very poignant wedding ring scene at the end. The one in the middle when she's trying to sell the ring to that unsuspecting couple.
Oh yeah, that was weird. Yeah.
But I found that really funny. she's like, she basically implies like if you don't buy this ring, like you don't think your wife is like special or deserves it or whatever. And he's just like,
it was just weird because they sort of gave them characters, like, you know, the way he's like, oh no, it's like, this is weird. Why are we? Yeah.
It definitely doesn't need to be in the movie, but I definitely chuckled at it. Yeah,
it's amusing.
Yeah. So let's talk about the color red. There's a lot, so I'm going to rush through a bunch of these just to make this quick, because otherwise we could literally be here all day. But red is generally used to depict when the world of the living and the world of the dead would meet. So if red was in a scene when they were filming it, and that would not have been the case, so the scene wasn't intended to be a bridging scene, they would remove red from the set wherever they could. They took real care to do it. So the places it is involved are very deliberately chosen. So the door to the church, when Malcolm and Cole first meet, that's red. The statue Cole takes from the church has a red robe. The door knocker to Malcolm's basement, which he's constantly trying to get through, is also red. Cole's school uniform jacket is a kind of red-maroon colour, because obviously at school that's teeming with ghosts. Anna wears a red dress at the restaurant when Malcolm is late for their anniversary. Malcolm is watching Anna in the shower and notices a prescription bottle. This one I think is a bit... It's a reddish prescription bottle. I think that one's a bit thin. But Lynn's nail polish is red when she's pointing out the white spots on all of the pictures of Cole in the hallway. Cole's free association writing is specifically chosen to be in red ink. At the birthday party, the balloons are all pastel coloured, except for the single balloon that takes Cole up the stairway to where the ghost is. That one is red. Cole is wearing a red sweater when he's attacked by the spirit in the closet. Cole's blanket at the end, when he's in the hospital, is red when he confesses to Malcolm. The birthday gift that Anna gives to Sean is in a red box, and she's wearing red when the two of them embrace. Malcolm listens to a taped session of Vincent. Oh, this was my favourite one. As he turns up the volume on the cassette to the old Vincent tape to the point where he can hear the ghost talking, the numbers go from white to red at the very highest one. That's my favourite one. That's fucking great.
Yeah, that was good.
And some poor prop designer had to fucking paint, because you wouldn't design it that way, so someone had to paint those red. When she appears in Cole's fort, obviously the blanket covering it is completely red. The box containing her VHS is also red. The outfit worn by her mum at the wake is also bright red, and she's the only person wearing a bright colour at the wake. I'm trying to think, are there any others here that are worth going through? Oh yeah, the cleaner that Mrs. Collins is adding to the soup has a red cap on it, but I don't know, that one I think is like, that must be an accident, because that's, at what point is that interacting with the world of the dead? No.
But wasn't it, what I read was like World of the Dead or highly emotional moments, so maybe
yeah, I saw that as well, but then I was like, that could just be any scene. But yeah, the bicyclist that Cole sees next to the car is wearing a red helmet, and the blanket that Anna Crow covers herself with while watching the Reading video and being interacted with when Malcolm comes home is red. So there you go, a big old list, but fuck me, that's a lot of detail and attention to thought. And like, again, my favourite one is the cassette player one, but most of those are pretty good.
Yeah, no, they're great. Yeah, no, it's again, like you say, attention to detail is stunning.
So, we're ready for my favourite segment, your favourite segment, everyone's favourite segment, world famous, the only thing people download this podcast for. Chris, it's time for Cars Exist! You know, it's funny, whenever we do that, I think of the Formula One has like a sort of a theme tune, and it used to be The Chain.
Yeah.
You know, by who was the chain by? Fleetwood Mac. But in recent years, they got bought by another company, and they decided to commission a composer to a Formula One theme, and it's fucking brilliant. It's really good. It's like this big orchestral dun 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 but dun 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 dun, and then they for some reason it felt like the guy composed this incredibly epic piece of music, and they went, oh, it's not very car based, is it? So how the song actually goes, Chris, is dun 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 but dun 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 dun. It's the stupidest thing ever. And I love it. Anyone wants to find that piece of music online, it's great. Anyway,
if you need to find it, it's available on CD. It's track number 7. Malcolm is Dead. It doesn't fit that. That doesn't fit that music either. But
yeah, track number 8. Lewis Hamilton wins again.
Yeah.
Anyway, there are no, obviously. There's one featured car in the movie. So I looked on the Internet Car Movie Database, which is a real thing, by the way, that I've recently discovered. Because, can I make a point here? The reason cars exists is because every movie we looked at had the car they drive is and then names the car. Piece of trivia attached to it. And I noticed this trend and then made it part of the podcast, right? Simple as. But occasionally, there isn't one in the trivia. And then I'm like, oh, fuck, I'm going to have to look up what this car was or whatever. But last week what was the movie we did last? Memento. They didn't have a car trivia automatically in it. So
Can I just say, I don't think the bit is strong enough to justify your time looking it up for it specifically, but carry on.
Look, I'm committed now. Cars exist, world famous segment. I'm committed. So I, last week, had to go looking it up for one of the first times ever, because usually it's just already there. That was the reason it began, was because it was a joke I didn't need to worry about because it was already ready for me. But it wasn't there last week, and I had to look it up. And I found this website, the Internet Car Movie Database, where if you just type in a movie, it'll tell you all of the cars that are in the movie with pictures. And obviously, most movies have hundreds of cars in the background. So it makes it really difficult. You've got to find the car that's actually worth talking about. So, with that in mind, the car that the car scene happens in, the big dramatic crux of the entire movie, is a 1983 Volvo GL.
Nice. Great cars exist. Great. I mean, yeah, very integral to the movie. So
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Key scene. So, that brings us to the end of trivia and to the question. It's on everyone's lips, Chris, because we're finally going to reveal it. We've teased it, and we've even, I feel like we've both had wobbles on which way we were going to go with this. We mentioned at the start of this series that there was a big movie coming out this year. So for anyone listening to this in the future who's come back to this podcast, it's 2021, and there are 2 movies coming out towards the end of the year that are sequels of sort, well, part of a franchise, would be a better way to describe it, I think, for one in particular, where they had movies that were out in this era that we were interested in and passionate about, and were both very, very, me for both, but I think you for one very, very seriously, and then the other one kind of passively, right?
Both fairly. Okay. No, yeah, okay. Both, yeah.
Yeah, I didn't want to assume, so yeah. And I'll put the cards on the table now. The 2 franchises that have movies coming out this year that we were considering, because we've started a tradition of doing a trilogy per series of Rewind reviews. So the 2 trilogies on the table for us to do were the Sam Raimi Spider-Man movies and the Wachowskis' Matrix trilogy, which both have new movies coming out at the end of this year. Now, the actual choice for next week's episode is in Chris's hands. Now, I think we've come to a consensus. We talked about it before we started this very podcast. But actually, strictly speaking, Chris, by the rules, it's your call.
Yeah, and it has been tempting to just randomly go name the other one. But it got so fucking convoluted, the discussion and the dates. Like, we went so round the houses that I just don't want that to be wasted time. This is we're both convinced the safer bet for definitely going to come out, regardless. So we are going with The Matrix.
We are. We're going to do The Matrix trilogy.
And actually, I've probably got more memories of The Matrix than Spider-Man, actually.
Mm.
Because I think when you said not that, but you assumed I was more bothered about Spider-Man, but actually...
No, I thought you were more bothered about Matrix, because when we first met, you weren't a big superhero movie guy at all. I mean, you slowly, over the course of, over the course of like my time knowing you, have gotten more and more into superhero movies. I remember dragging you a little bit to go see X-Men First Class at a midnight show, and
I'm picking that for one day for this, because that's still one of my favorite cinema experiences.
It was wonderful
because I was just so not fussed about going.
Right.
And it was really, you got me on like, it's midnight, and I'm like, yeah, I'll see a movie at midnight. But yeah.
Yeah, so I kind of dragged. We had an interview to promote Writing Space, I think, like a Zoom interview, that went out. It was like, do you remember that? And then we were like, and we were together for that.
File somewhere.
And we were worried that because it was a long show, and we didn't know where our interview fell, and we were really worried that we weren't going to get interviewed till right at the end of the show, and it would mean we missed the movie. So. And I just remember that whole thing, that whole palaver, and it worked out fine. It was great. It was a really fun interview and whatever. But like we
I'd forgotten
we go out and see the movie, and I remember
you
just being like a little bit like, why is this a thing? Why are we going out like you were kind of in, but you were in, I think, with some hesitancy about the film itself, for sure.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely fair. And there was some right knobheads behind us as well. That's brought that flooding back.
But
So we won't do the thing where we talk about it now, but we
I knew definitely. From early on, me and you were both huge Matrix fans growing up. Whereas I wasn't sure how, because of your interaction with superhero movies when I first met you, I didn't really think you were that fussed about Spider-Man as a kid. But evidently I've been
that's fair.
Proven wrong.
Well, I saw it with mates and stuff, and we were pumped, right. And but even to this day, I don't think I've seen the third. So yeah, it's definitely. You were right. I was definitely more The Matrix. Yeah. But I think you and I had that fucking 10 DVD box set, didn't we?
I still have it.
We will talk about.
It's on my shelf.
We will talk about. Wow, we will talk about all of that next week.
Yes, and I will say as well, to Chris's point of, we were thinking about which one is actually likely to come out when it's done. I've already got reason to believe it's going to be delayed in the UK, Matrix Resurrections, whatever it's called. So, I think Spider-Man's release very much depends on the canary in the coal mine that is. It turns out there's plenty of time to die, because if hold on a minute, there's 2 years to die because of COVID, doesn't do well, they'll probably pull Spider-Man or at least push it back a bit.
Yeah, and both of us. For me, you know what? For me, the big thing was it felt like the Matrix felt closer to the Matrix 4, just because there's that anal part of me going, in order to truly do it for No Way Home, you've got to do the two Amazing Spider-Mans as well, seemingly. So yeah, no, right. That swung it for me. And also, I think it's, think it's more of a fun experiment in the lead up to a film. I think doing the Matrix ones.
Yeah, and I think as well, I feel like I actually am more eager to rewatch the Matrix movies because I've rewatched the Sam Raimi Spider-Man movies every couple of years of my life, like every year or two. I'm like, I'll rewatch those. Those are fun. And I think I only last rewatched them. Well, I was in this flat, so within the last 3 years. So whereas I don't think I've seen the Matrix trilogy. God, uni. Maybe uni.
Yeah.
So
I don't know.
I think
I've seen the first.
I'm looking for a good excuse to watch them, and also they go off. They're on Netflix until the middle of October, and then they go away. So we could take advantage now while they're still on Netflix.
I think I've seen the first one since uni, but I don't think I saw 2 and 3 as well.
And it's really funny because Weekly Planet, who do a thing called Caravan of Garbage, which it doesn't mean the movie's bad, it just is what they call it, where they go back and watch some old movies. They've done like the Michael Bay Transformers movies, and they do, they sometimes pip us, and I go like, I can't watch it because I don't want to know what they're going to say, like, I don't want it to influence if we do it on Rewind Reviews. They did the Santa Claus movies last year, and they just did the Matrix trilogy like 3 weeks ago, and I was like, I really want to watch these and hear what they say about it, but I also don't want to be influenced when we review it, so I've not watched them yet. I'm almost looking forward to doing the Matrix so I can go back and watch the Weekly Planet's videos on it.
That's fair. That's fair. Yes. So no, that's where we're going next week. The Matrix.
Very excited. Big fun times with what my memory says is a good movie and two terrible movies, but probably that is not that. It's probably not as clean cut as that.
Yeah, I reckon maybe if I was a betting man, I'd bet maybe the first one isn't as incredible as our memory says, and the second two aren't as bad as our memory says either.
Oh, that's an interesting thought, because I was wondering if like the first one is going to just hold up as like this really great, like, because I think the people who would watch the first one and not like it, this is a conversation we can only really have now before we've sat down to watch it, so I'll very quickly finish this thought if that's okay. Because obviously next week we won't be able to say this because we'll know, because we'll have seen it. But I have a feeling with the first one, it'll hold up better for us than for this generation, because I feel like someone young now who hasn't seen it, like I've mentioned this in the past, I work with a lot of like 20-year-olds, like 20-odd-year-olds, like early 20s, and a lot of them haven't seen the first Matrix. I haven't seen the Matrix films, and I'm just like, I don't know, if they sit down and watch those movies, the stuff that's in the Matrix that was revolutionary in its day has been done to death now and won't even register to them as being cool in any way, shape, or form.
And I agree with that, but I think there is also some stuff, because it's a bit, Sixth Sense experience-wise, of like the, bullet time won't look impressive because bullet time got spoofed in Shrek. But there is also, it's my way or the highway, or whatever that line is. There's a lot of that in there as well, which I think might not seem as cool.
Interesting. Yeah, so we'll find out.
She I don't know if it's that line, but in the scene with the car, she says there's something someone has a really cheesy fucking line.
That does not surprise
but again, could be wrong. I would be happy to be wrong.
Yeah, no, so I'm super excited about that, and looking forward to sitting down and rewatching them again. From your perspective, dear listener, they'll be coming out next week. It'll start next week. From our perspective, there might be a small gap in recording because Chris is getting married, so we've got to figure that out yet. But that's for us to work out.
Yeah.
So if Chris sounds somewhat different at the start of the next recording, you'll know it's because he's a married man now.
No, I reckon we might be able to work some stuff on that.
I'm pretty sure Jess is forbidding you to record on your wedding day, Chris. So I don't know.
Yeah, no, I'm not suggesting we sit down. I suppose because in my head, then for some reason I was only thinking of it as two. It is no, you're right. It is ambitious to say we're going to do 3 of these in a week.
Right. Yeah.
Good point. Yeah, fair point. Yeah, maybe. Well, maybe it's right. We'll have to. This conversation we'll be having on air. I think we compare schedules, and we either hold off on all of it, or I don't think we should do one and then have a massive gap. I think you're right. We need to do the 3 close together. That's we need to compare schedules, see what's possible, and then go from there.
Yeah. But there's So anyway, so thank you everyone for listening. Come back obviously in a week's time to hear that, or head over to the Patreon and you can get it now. You can go listen to it now. It'll be up there. Everything goes up a week early on the Patreon. For as little as $1 a month, you can be both supporting us and getting access to these episodes and analysing Avatar episodes a week early. Also allows you to ask us a question. If you want to help us and you don't want to give us money, you can head over to the Rewind Reviews page on iTunes or wherever and leave us a review, 5 stars.
Obviously,
anyone 4 stars or less, get out of here. But you don't actually talk about the podcast because that's kind of boring. Tell us about your personal Rewind reviews. What movies have you gone back to in your life and found they either don't hold up or totally hold up? What are the movies of your childhood? Me and Chris are of a very specific era, so a lot of the movies you'll notice that we talk about are like late 80s, early 90s, that sort of era, and actually through the early, late 90s, early 2000s. Well, that's kind of like our window for what we're doing a lot of this stuff from. But you might be younger or older and have a completely different set of films that you remember that way. So let us know. Tell us about your favorite experiences going back to old movies, or least favorite. I'd be excited to hear it. So thanks everyone for listening. Also like and subscribe on the YouTube channel and all that jazz. And Twitter, I'm at Dan Doolan and Chris is at C Billingham. And I should have said I said go over to the Patreon, didn't give the link. Patreon.com/nothing-but-static if you want to support us there. That's everything for this week. Thank you guys so much for listening. I've got to let Chris do his thing. I stepped on it.
Man.
Sorry, Chris.
No, it's fine. No, you do it. It was leading in so beautifully. You go for it.
Okay. Well, I've been Dan Doolan.
I've been Chris Billingham.
And this review is being rewound.
A little bit more talking while you do that sexy headphone switcheroo.
Oh yeah, what is so sexy about the switcheroo? And now I have questions.
I just imagine you're naked and erect.
Sure. I mean, where have you hidden the camera?
In a book I gave you. That Stephen University book. It's got a camera in it.
Wow, it's a good camera. It's in a different room and it's still picking me up here, naked and erect.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. You have to work hard to be as perverted as me.
Great.